It was 7:14 on a Thursday evening when my brother called me for the first time in 2 years. I remember the time because I'd been staring at the microwave clock when the phone rang, waiting for leftovers to heat up. Pasta. The kind you make when you're tired and you don't want to think. The kind you eat standing over the sink because sitting down feels like a commitment you can't make. The phone buzzed on the counter. I looked at it, and my whole body just stopped. His name was right there. Holden, the same way I'd saved it when I was 19. No emoji, no last name, just the 4 letters. I thought about deleting his contact 100 times in 2 years. I never did. I told myself it was because I needed to know if he ever tried. I told myself a lot of things. I let it ring. I watched it ring. And then when it stopped, I picked up the phone and held it in both hands like it was something I'd found in the dirt. There was a voicemail. I could see the little red number. And I sat down at the kitchen table. I don't even remember walking to the chair, and I just stayed there for 20 minutes with the phone in my hands, not listening, not deleting, just sitting. I knew what I was supposed to feel. I'd rehearsed it. I'd imagined this moment so many times in the first 6 months after I cut him off that I'd worn the imagining out. In every version, I felt powerful. In every version, I felt clean. I'd built this whole scaffolding inside myself for the day my brother might finally reach out, and now the day was here and the scaffolding was just gone, like it had never been built. Like none of it had ever been real. I felt nothing. And then I felt everything. And then I felt nothing again. That's the part nobody tells you about cutting someone off. They tell you it's hard. They tell you you'll grieve. They tell you about the holidays and the empty chair and the friends who don't understand. But nobody tells you what happens when the person you cut off comes back, not screaming, not apologizing, not begging, but quiet, small, sick, because that's what the voicemail was going to say. I knew before I listened. I knew the moment I saw his name. There's a particular silence that arrives before bad news, and it was sitting in my kitchen with me. I'm going to tell you what happened. All of it, the call, the decision, what I did, what I didn't do, and what I'm still, even now, even tonight, trying to figure out. I'm telling you because I've spent 2 years reading every article and every book about estrangement, and not one of them prepared me for this. Not one of them told me what to do when the person who hurt you becomes the person who needs you. So if you're listening and you've ever had to make this kind of decision, or you're afraid you'll have to one day, stay with me, because I don't have the answer. I have what I did, and I have what it cost me, and I have what it gave me. And I'm still not sure which one was bigger. My name is Maren. I'm 31 years old. I live in a small apartment in a town called Briar Hill, which isn't where I grew up, but is close enough that I can drive to my parents' house in under 2 hours if I'm desperate or stupid. For 2 years, I was neither. I work in a library, not the dramatic kind of job people put in stories. I check books out, I shelve them, I help old men find biographies of generals they've already read. I like it. It's quiet in a way my childhood was never quiet. Quiet the way water is quiet, not the way a held breath is quiet. There's a difference. I didn't know there was a difference until I left. I have a best friend named Priya who I met in college and who, for the entire 2 years of my estrangement, has been the kind of friend who doesn't ask you to explain yourself again. She just believes you the first time. Do you know how rare that is, to be believed without needing to keep proving it? I didn't know either until her. And I have an apartment that's mine. Just mine. With a soft green couch I bought at an estate sale. And a wall of books I've actually read. And a kitchen window that gets the morning light. And a small ceramic dish by the door where I put my keys every night. It's not impressive. It's not curated. But it's the first place I've ever lived where I don't flinch when the front door opens. And that's a thing I never thought I'd have. I'm not someone who needs much. I just wanted a life where I didn't feel afraid in my own house. That's it. That's all this was ever about. I want to tell you something about my brother before I tell you what he did, because if I don't, you won't understand. You'll think this is a story about a bad man. And it isn't, exactly. It's a story about a man who was so good at performing love that he confused himself, and confused everyone else, and confused me most of all, for 30 years. Holden is 4 years older than me. Growing up, he was the son. I'm not being poetic. In our family, he was the gravitational center of everything. Our mother, Marjorie, built her days around his moods. Our father, Ellis, saved his good stories for Holden's friends. When Holden was happy, we were a family. When Holden was unhappy, we were a household waiting for the weather to change. And he was charming. God, he was charming. He had this way of looking at you like you were the only person in the room, the kind of attention that makes you feel chosen. When I was a kid, that attention felt like love. I think for a long time, I confused being chosen with being loved. I think a lot of us do. When I was 9 years old, Holden carved me a small wooden bird. He'd taken some kind of woodworking class at school, and he was briefly obsessed. He made me this little bird, a sparrow, I think. But it's hard to tell because the carving wasn't really very good. The wings were uneven. One eye was bigger than the other. But he gave it to me in the kitchen one afternoon, and he said, "I made this for you because you're my favorite person in this house." And I believed him. I kept that bird on my windowsill until I was 29 years old. I want you to remember the bird. Because the bird matters later. The bird matters more than I knew. When I went off to college, Holden drove me. 4 hours, just the two of us. He bought me a sandwich at a rest stop and told me I was going to be okay. At my graduation, he flew in from another state. He was already living his own life by then, doing whatever it was he did. Something in sales, and he put his arm around me in the photograph our mother took, and we both laughed at something I can't remember now. That photograph hangs in the hallway of my parents' house. It hung there my whole adult life. It might still be hanging there. I think about that photograph a lot. Because the brother in that photograph, the one with his arm around me, laughing, I just didn't know it yet. The brother I thought I had was a story I'd been telling myself since I was 9 years old. Sitting in a kitchen with a small wooden bird that wasn't quite a sparrow. You can love a story about a person for a very long time before you realize you never actually knew them. And that, more than anything else, is what I want you to understand before I tell you what he did. Because the betrayal wasn't just what he did. The betrayal was the moment I realized I had been alone in our relationship for years, and I had never noticed he was so good, so unbelievably good, at pretending. Here's what he did. I want to say it cleanly, because if I let myself, I will start qualifying it. I will start saying, well, but he was going through something. I will start saying, well, but our parents. I will start saying, well, but families are complicated. And the truth is, I've already said all those things to myself 1,000 times in 1,003 a.m. moments, and saying them never changed what happened. So let me just say what happened. When our grandmother died, her name was Eva. She was my father's mother. She was the only adult in my childhood who ever asked what I thought about anything. She left me money, not a fortune, $48,000. She left it specifically to me, in a will, with her own handwriting. And she included a note that said, for Maren, who I know will use it kindly. She left Holden the same amount. She left our cousins smaller amounts. She left our parents the house. It was, by her standards, an extremely organized will. She had been a kindergarten teacher for 41 years. She was a woman who labeled things. I was 28 years old when she died. I was working 3 jobs, paying down student loans, trying to save for a security deposit on the kind of apartment I just described to you. That money, Iva's money, was to me the answer to a question I had been carrying for years. It meant I could leave the bad apartment I was in. It meant I could quit the worst of my 3 jobs. It meant I could breathe. I want you to understand, I wasn't planning to buy a yacht. I wasn't planning to take a vacation. I was planning to be able to sleep at night without lying awake calculating numbers. Holden offered to help me manage it. That's how he put it. He was older. He had a financial background. He said, look, Maren, I'll just help you put it somewhere it can grow a little before you need it. You're not going to use it for 6 months anyway. Let me help. It's what Eva would have wanted. And our mother was sitting right there at the kitchen table when he said it, nodding, smiling, saying, oh, Maren, isn't that lovely of him? Isn't it nice that he wants to help? And here is my flaw. Here is the thing I have to tell you about myself. Because if I don't, you'll think this is a story about a stupid girl. And it isn't. Or maybe it is, I don't know. I'm still figuring that out too. I want to be loved. I wanted my brother to want to help me. I wanted him to see me as someone worth helping. I wanted my mother to look at me the way she looked at him, so I said yes. I said yes, even though a small voice inside me, a very small voice, the kind of voice you've been trained your whole life to ignore, said this is wrong. Don't do this. I gave him access to the account. I want to skip the next part. I want to fast forward. But I won't, because if I do, I'm doing the same thing to you that the world did to me. Pretending the painful part doesn't matter. Pretending we can just get to the resolution. The painful part is the whole point. So, over the next 8 months, the money disappeared, not all at once, in pieces, a few thousand here, a few thousand there. Every time I asked about it, he had an answer, a market position, a temporary thing, a trust me, this is the way it works. Every time I pushed harder, our mother got involved. Maren, sweetheart, you're being paranoid. Holden is doing you a favor, don't make a scene. We don't make a scene in this family, that's what she always said. Calmly, like a weather report, like it was a value, not a weapon. By the time I figured out the full picture, there was $11,000 left of Iva's $48,000. Holden had used most of it to cover the failure of some business venture that I, to this day, do not fully understand the details of. There were no records. There was no growth. There was just gone. I'm telling you about money because money is what happened. But money isn't what this is about. This is about the fact that when I confronted him, sitting in my parents' kitchen, on a Saturday afternoon with both of them at the table, he looked at me with the same warm, attentive eyes that had made me feel chosen when I was 9 years old, and he said, Maren,
are you really going to do this to our family over money?
And our mother said, we don't make a scene in this family. And our father didn't say anything at all. And I sat there for what felt like an hour, but was probably 30 seconds, and I looked at the 3 of them, and I understood. For the first time in my entire life, all at once, like a window breaking, that I had never been one of them. I had been a witness as in my own family. I had been the one who watched while the family happened around her. I stood up. I picked up my purse. I walked out of the house. I drove the 4 hours home. I did not cry on the drive. I cried when I got into bed that night, and I cried for what I think was about 6 weeks, on and off, in a way that scared me. And then one morning I woke up and I didn't cry, and I started to build the life I have now. I never asked for the money back. I never called the police. I never told the extended family what had happened. Priya told me I should. She was the only person I told the whole truth to, and she was furious. Not at him at first, but at me for not doing more. And I told her, I am doing the most I have ever done. I am leaving. That is the most I have. That is everything I have. For 2 years, I did not speak to Holden. I did not speak to my mother except in a few cold, brief exchanges by text that ended when she insisted I come home and stop being dramatic. I exchanged occasional emails with my father, short, factual kind in a way that felt like a hand reaching out from a great distance. He never apologized, but he never defended Holden either. That was the closest I got from him. I learned to take it, and I built my life, the library, the apartment, the green couch, Priya, mornings. The slow, ordinary work of being a person. And then, on a Thursday evening at 7:14, my phone rang. I sat at the kitchen table for 20 minutes before I listened to the voicemail. I want to be honest with you about that, because if I tell you I listened right away, I'm performing. I'm performing strength or restraint or composure. I'm performing the kind of woman I wish I'd been. I sat there, I held the phone, I thought about all the things he might say. I rehearsed answers to apologies I wasn't sure I'd ever get. I imagined his voice, I imagined hanging up, I imagined never finding out. At one point, I got up and I poured myself a glass of water and I stood at the sink and I drank the entire glass in one go, and I think I was buying myself time. I think I was hoping that if I waited long enough, the voicemail would just evaporate, the way bad news sometimes does when you refuse to read it. But voicemails don't evaporate. So eventually I sat back down, I pressed play, I put the phone to my ear, and I listened to my brother's voice for the first time in 2 years. He sounded different. That was the first thing. The charm, that polished, easy charm that had always been the soundtrack of his voice, wasn't there. He sounded tired. His voice was thinner. He cleared his throat twice in the first 10 seconds, the way people do when they're nervous and trying not to show it. And he said, Maren, it's me. I know I'm the last person you want to hear from. I know that. I'm not calling to argue or to ask for anything. I need to tell you something. I've been sick. It's serious. The doctors are saying, well, I just thought you should know. From me, not from Mom. From me. If you want to call me back, you can. If you don't, I understand. And then there was a pause, a long one. The kind of pause where you can hear someone deciding what to do with their face on the other end of the line. And then he said, I'm sorry. And then he hung up. I want to tell you what I felt. I want to give you the clean version. The version where I felt one clear, decisive thing, anger or pity or vindication or grief. The version where there was a feeling I could name and act on. But what I actually felt was this. I felt like I had been knocked underwater, not violently, just suddenly. Like the floor of my own life had become liquid, and I was sinking through it slowly, and every familiar thing, my kitchen, my chair, the microwave clock, the unfinished pasta, was wavering at the surface above me, and I couldn't reach any of it. I felt, how dare you? I felt, are you actually sick? I felt, you said sorry. You said sorry for the first time in your entire life. I felt, I do not believe you. I felt, I believe you, and that is somehow worse. I felt, I am 31 years old and I am sitting alone at a kitchen table, and my brother who stole from me and broke me has just told me he is dying. I felt very young. I felt 9 years old. I felt the small wooden bird I left on the windowsill of my old bedroom 2 years ago, and I felt it like a weight in my chest. I called Priya. It was 8:02 by the time I called her. I know because she still has a screenshot from that night. She sent it to me a few weeks ago when we were trying to piece the timeline back together. And she said, look how long it took you to call me. And we both looked at it, and I felt something very tender and very sad about the version of me who sat in that kitchen for 48 minutes before she could pick up the phone again. Priya, listen, she let me cry. She did not say, I told you so. She did not say, he deserves it. She did not say, you don't owe him anything. Those were all things other people would say later. But Priya, who has known me for 10 years and has earned the right to say almost anything to me, said only one thing that night. She said, Maren, whatever you decide to do, I'm here. But you don't have to decide tonight. You don't have to decide tomorrow. You don't have to decide until you decide, okay? And I said, okay. And then I didn't sleep. I want to tell you about not sleeping, because the thing nobody tells you about a moment like this is that the decision doesn't happen in the moment. The decision happens at 2:47 in the morning, when you are staring at the ceiling, and the street light outside your window is making a stripe of light on the wall, and you are thinking about every single thing he ever did for you and every single thing he ever did to you. And the two lists are happening simultaneously in your head, and they are roughly equal in length, and you cannot tell which list is the truth. The decision happens at 4:00 in the morning, when you finally get up because lying down is worse, and you stand in your kitchen drinking tea that you don't want, and you find yourself doing something you have not done in 2 years. You are talking to him out loud. You are saying things to him. You are saying, how dare you? You are saying, are you really sick, or is this another performance? You are saying, if you die, am I going to be the person who didn't go? You are saying, if you die, am I going to be free? And you are horrified by your own voice. And you are horrified by your own honesty. And you are horrified that there is no version of this where you come out clean. The decision happens slowly somewhere between 4 and 6 in the morning, when the sky outside your kitchen window starts to turn the color of weak tea and you realize there is no good option. There is no version of this where I am the right kind of woman. There is no version of this where the people watching will agree I did the right thing. There is no script. There is just me. There is just what I can live with. And the question that finally surfaced, the question I was not expecting, was not, should I go, or should I forgive him, or should I help? The question was, whose voice am I listening to when I decide? Because the voice that was telling me to forgive, that voice was my mother's voice. That was Marjorie saying, we don't make a scene in this family. That was 31 years of training. That was the voice that had cost me everything once before. And the voice that was telling me to stay home and never respond. That voice wasn't mine either. That was the voice of every friend, every internet stranger, every well-meaning advice column that had told me, over 2 years, that estrangement was the answer and that I owed nothing to anyone who had hurt me. That voice had been my armor. It had been useful. But it was an armor, not a self. An armor isn't a person. Armor is the shape of the wound. I wanted to know what my voice said. Just mine. Underneath all the other voices, I sat with that for a long time. The tea got cold. The sun came up. And what my voice said, eventually, when I let it speak, was this: I want to know if it's true. I want to see him. Not to forgive him. Not to save him. Not to perform anything. Just, I want to see him. Because I am the only one who gets to decide what I do with this moment. And to decide, I have to know what's actually true. So I texted him back at 7 in the morning with cold tea in my hand and 12 hours of not sleeping behind me. I texted, I got your voicemail. I'd like to see you, just once. Tell me when. I did not say I love you. I did not say I forgive you. I did not say I'm coming home. I said, I'd like to see you, just once. And then I put my phone face down and I went to take a shower. And I cried in the shower in a way I had not cried in 18 months. Not because of him. Because I had, for maybe the first time in my whole adult life, made a decision that was entirely, completely, only my own. Before I drove out to see him, I had to talk to my mother. I did not want to. I want you to know that. I had not spoken to Marjorie on the phone, actually on the phone with our voices, in over a year. The last conversation had ended with her saying, you are breaking this family, Maren. And me saying, no, Mom, I'm the only one who's noticed it was already broken. But she was the one who knew where he was. She was the one with the hospital details, the timeline, the doctors' names. And so I did the thing I had sworn I would never do again. I called my mother. She picked up on the second ring, which told me everything I needed to know about how much she had been waiting. Maren, she said, and her voice was warm. Warmer than it had any right to be. Warmer than it had ever been to me, even on my best days, in the years before all this. Oh, Maren, I knew you'd call. I knew you would. And right there in the first 10 seconds of the conversation, I almost hung up. Because that warmth wasn't for me. That warmth was for the daughter who had finally come back. That warmth was the warmth of being right. She had been telling herself for 2 years that I would come crawling back eventually. And here I was. And she was going to be gracious about it. She was going to be magnanimous. She was going to forgive me in her head for the crime of having boundaries. I almost hung up, but I didn't. I took a breath and I said very evenly, Mom, I'm calling because of Holden, not because of us. I want to be clear about that. There was a small silence. The warmth in her voice cooled just a little, and she said, of course, sweetheart, of course. Whatever you need. She told me about the diagnosis. It was real. I want to say that first because I spent a lot of that morning hoping it wasn't. The illness was real. It was serious. It was the kind of word that, when you hear it, makes your shoulders drop 2 inches without you noticing. But here is what she said next. She said, the doctors are saying he doesn't have much time, Maren, weeks, maybe a couple of months. So if you want to come, you should come soon. We're all here. We're all staying at the house. Colette is here, you know, his wife, and the kids come on weekends. It's like the old days, in a way. It's been hard, but it's been beautiful too. We're a family again. And I want you to listen to what she did in those sentences. Because she did it so smoothly, so naturally, that if I hadn't spent 2 years in therapy learning to hear it, I would have missed it. She made the illness about the family. She made me coming home, not coming to see him. She used the word we 5 times. She said it's been beautiful. About her dying son. She said, we're a family again. Like the only thing missing from us being a family was me agreeing to play my part. I felt the old pull. I want you to know that too. I felt the old, deep, embarrassing pull of wanting to belong. I felt the part of myself that had spent 31 years auditioning for a role in that family suddenly perk up like a dog. hearing a key in the door. I almost said, I'll come tomorrow. I almost said, I've missed you. I almost said all the things I had been forbidding myself to say. Instead, I said, Mom, I'm coming to see Holden by myself. I'd like to see him alone. I'm not coming to stay at the house. I'm getting a hotel. She paused, and then she said, in a voice that was no longer warm, Maren, he is your brother. He is dying. And you're going to stay at a hotel? And here is where it happened. Here is the small, almost invisible moment that I am most proud of in this entire story. Because I did not justify. I did not explain. I did not list my reasons. I did not perform my grief or my history or my pain. I just said yes. And then I let the silence sit and I let her be uncomfortable in it. For the first time in my entire life. She tried, of course. She said, your father would want you here. Your aunt is going to wonder. What am I supposed to tell people? She used the word people 3 times. She always used the word people when she wanted to make me responsible for managing her image. And I said, tell them whatever you want, Mom. I'll be there Saturday. And I sat on my green couch in my small apartment in Briar Hill, and I shook, just shook, like I had been holding something very heavy, and I had finally put it down, and my arms didn't know what to do with themselves anymore. I drove out on Saturday morning. 4 hours. The same drive Holden had once driven with me when I was 18, the sandwich at the rest stop, the you're going to be okay. I thought about that drive the whole way. I thought about him being kind. I thought about how kindness in a person who has hurt you becomes the most confusing thing in the world, because you cannot pretend it didn't happen. You cannot reduce them to a monster. You have to hold both the kindness and the harm at the same time, and the whole thing is what breaks you. I cried twice on the drive. Both times I pulled over. Both times I waited until I could breathe. Both times I got back on the road. I checked into my hotel, a clean, anonymous chain hotel off the highway, with thin sheets and a window that didn't open. I had picked it on purpose. I wanted the room to feel like nowhere. I wanted to be in a place that had no memory. And then I drove to the hospital. I don't remember walking in. I remember the smell, that hospital smell, which is not exactly disinfectant and not exactly fear, but something in between. I remember the elevator. I remember asking at a desk for a room number and being told it like it was an ordinary number, like it was the answer to an ordinary question. I remember walking down a corridor that was too bright. I remember stopping outside his door, and I remember thinking very clearly, very plainly, I do not have to go in. I have driven 4 hours and I do not have to go in. Even now, even at this door, I can turn around. No one. And that's the only person who matters. And then I went in. He was smaller than I remembered. That was the first thing. Not sick looking exactly, not yet, not in the dramatic movie way. He was thinner, his face was less full. There was a kind of grayness to his skin that wasn't there before, like the color had been turned down 2 notches. But mostly, he was smaller. Like the room was the same size, but he wasn't filling it the way he used to fill rooms. He was sitting up in the bed, holding a paperback book he wasn't reading. He looked up when I came in, and for 1 second, 1 full second, his face did something I had never seen it do before. It crumpled. Not in a performed way, in a real way. Like a piece of paper folding in on itself briefly, before being smoothed flat again. Then he smiled. The old smile, the Holden smile, the one that had made me feel chosen. But the smile didn't quite work. It was the same shape, but the engine behind it was different, like a song being played on the wrong instrument. You came, he said. I came, I said. We were quiet for a moment. I was still standing in the doorway. I didn't sit down. I want you to know I didn't sit down for the first 11 minutes of that conversation, because every time I started to, my body said no, and I trusted my body. He said, thank you. I said, don't thank me. I didn't come for you. I came because I needed to see for myself. And his eyes, and this is the thing I keep coming back to, his eyes registered the words. They actually registered them. For maybe the first time in our entire life together, he heard what I said, not a version of it, not an edited version, not what he wanted me to mean. He heard the actual sentence, and he nodded, slowly, like a man receiving information he hadn't been prepared for. He said, that's fair. And we sat with that for a moment. And then I finally sat down, in the hard chair by the window, and we talked. I am not going to tell you everything we said. Some of it isn't yours. Some of it isn't even mine anymore. It belongs to that room that afternoon, that particular slant of light through that particular window. But I'll tell you what I can. I asked him about the diagnosis. He told me. The doctors had been clear with him. The treatment had a low success rate. He had decided, against the family's wishes, to focus on comfort instead of fighting it. He had decided this 2 weeks ago. He had not told our mother. When he said that, when he said he had not told our mother that he was choosing comfort over treatment, I understood something. Marjorie had told me he had weeks, maybe months. She had said it in a particular way that had made me feel like I had to come immediately. And the truth was more complicated. The truth was, yes, he was dying. But the timeline she had given me was the timeline she wanted me to believe, not the timeline the doctors had given him. He could have a few months still, he could have less. He didn't know. Nobody knew. But he had not authorized her version of the story. She had built it, the way she had always built stories about us. I want to be careful here, because I don't want you to think I'm saying his illness wasn't real. It was real. He was dying. That part was true. But the urgency, the drop everything, the we're all here, come home, that was the story Marjorie was telling. And she was telling it because she wanted, more than anything, for me to come home at the role she had written for me, the prodigal daughter, the one who comes back, the one who completes the family portrait, the one who lets her be right. Holden told me this without quite knowing he was telling me. He told me by accident the way sick people tell you things. Half-conscious, no longer guarding their words as carefully as they used to. And I sat in that hard chair and I watched him and I thought, I have walked into a story. There are several stories happening in this hospital. I am only in one of them. And if I don't pay attention, I'll forget which one is mine. I asked him at one point why he had called me. Not Marjorie, not Ellis, not Colette. Why first? He looked out the window for a long time. The window faced a parking lot. There was nothing to look at. He looked anyway. And then he said, because you're the only person in our family I ever knew was actually paying attention. And I've been thinking about that a lot the last few weeks. I've been thinking about how everyone else loved me because of what I gave them. And you loved me because you actually saw me, or you tried to. And I used that. I used the fact that you saw me. Because nobody else did. He said, I don't remember a lot of our childhood, Maren. I don't. Not because of this. He gestured vaguely at the IV stand, the bed, the wallpaper, because of me. Because I wasn't there. I was always somewhere else, in my head, performing. I was always performing. And you were the only one who was actually in the room. He said, I'm not asking you to forgive me. I know better than that. I'm telling you because I owe you the truth before I can't tell it anymore. And then he was quiet. And I sat in the chair. And I felt the chair under me. And I felt the floor under the chair. And I felt the building under the floor. And I felt the ground under the building. And I tried to remember that I was a person made of bone, sitting in a real room, on a real Saturday, in a real life. Because something inside me was rearranging itself. And I didn't have time to track all of it. I just knew somehow that I was going to remember this moment for the rest of my life. Not because it was beautiful. It wasn't beautiful. Not because it was healing. I'm not sure it was. But because it was the first time in 31 years that my brother had spoken to me without a performance on top of him. And I had not realized until that moment that I had spent my entire life waiting for him to put the performance down. I almost said it. I almost said, I forgive you. The words were in my mouth. I could taste them. They were warm and they were easy and they would have made the moment end. They would have given him relief. They would have given the family a story to tell. They would have made me finally the good sister, the big woman, the one who rose above. I sat with the words on my tongue and I let them sit there. And I asked myself for the second time in 3 days, whose voice was speaking. And I heard very clearly that the voice asking me to forgive in that moment was not my voice. It was Marjorie's. It was the family portrait. It was the version of myself that had always wanted, more than anything, to be the good one. So I swallowed the words. I let them go back down. And instead, I said something true. I said, Holden, I hear you. I'm not going to tell you what I'm going to do with this. I don't know yet. I might never know, but I hear you. And I'm glad you said it. And he closed his eyes and he nodded and a tear came down the side of his face and he didn't wipe it and I didn't either. And we sat there for maybe 2 minutes in a silence that was, I want to find the right word. Clean as was a clean silence. It wasn't comfortable. It wasn't healed, but there was nothing in it that was a lie. And I had never been in a silence with him that didn't have a lie in it before. I had not known until that moment how heavy those lies had been. How much of the air in every room with him, my whole life, had been other people's lies. I stood up after a while. I told him I was leaving. He nodded. I told him I might come back. He nodded. I told him I might not. He nodded. He understood that all three were true. At the door, I turned around and I said one thing more. I said the money, Iva's money. I'm not asking for it. I'm telling you I'm not asking for it. Not because I forgive you. Because I have decided I don't want to be a person whose life is shaped by getting it back. I'm letting it go. For me. Not for you. He looked at me. He said, okay, and I left. In the corridor outside his room, my mother was waiting. I had known she would be. Some part of me had been counting down to it from the moment I walked in. She had not been in the room. She had given us that which I want to acknowledge because she had not had to, but she had been waiting. She was standing by the window at the end of the hall looking at her phone, and when I came out, she stood up straight and she walked toward me, and her face was already doing the thing her face did. The thing where she becomes the wounded one. The thing where whatever has happened, she gets to be the most hurt person in the room. Maren, she said, how is he? Was he okay? Are you okay? Oh, sweetheart, look at you. You look exhausted. Come back to the house. We have dinner. Verna's there. Your father's there. Come home. And I want to tell you, I want to be very clear with you about this. I did not have a speech prepared. I had not planned the moment. I had spent 4 hours driving up here trying not to plan it because every time I planned a confrontation with Marjorie, I lost. She was better at family conversations than I was. She had been training for them her whole life. So I did the only thing I had learned how to do in 2 years of being away from her. I told the truth. Plainly. Without performance, I said, Mom, I'm not coming back to the house tonight. I'm going to my hotel. I might come back to the hospital tomorrow. I might not. I'm doing what I need to do, and I'm doing it on my own timeline. I love you.
Look.
I'm sorry that hurts. But I'm not going to make a scene about it. I'm just And I swear to you, her face did the smallest possible thing. The corner of her mouth pulled, and she said, we don't make a scene in this family, Maren. She said it. She actually said it. The same sentence. Word for word. The one I had been carrying inside my chest for 2 years like a piece of shrapnel. And I am still proud of myself. I smiled. I didn't laugh. I smiled. The smallest, kindest smile I could manage. And I said, I know, Mom. I know we don't. And I think that's been the problem for a very long time. I said, I love you. I'm going to my hotel. And I walked past her, and I walked down the corridor, and I got in the elevator, and I cried in the elevator, and I drove back to the hotel. And I sat on the bed with my shoes still on, and I thought about a small wooden bird on a windowsill in a bedroom I had not slept in for 2 years. And I made the second decision I had made entirely for myself that week. I drove to the house the next morning, Sunday, early, before anyone else was up. I have a key. I always have. They never took it back. Marjorie would have considered taking it back to be a scene, so I let myself in. I walked through the kitchen where I had sat at 28, and watched my brother tell me I was making it about money. I walked down the hallway. I passed the graduation photograph. I stopped. I looked at it. I looked at the boy with his arm around me. I looked at the girl, laughing, who was about to spend the next 7 years auditioning for love in a house that had already cast her as the audience. And then I walked into my old bedroom. And there it was. On the windowsill, a little wooden sparrow with uneven wings and one eye bigger than the other, dusty, patient, waiting. I picked it up. I put it in my coat pocket. I walked back out through the kitchen. I left the key on the counter, not as a statement, just because I knew I was not going to use it again. And I left. I drove the 4 hours back to Briar Hill. And the whole way, I had one hand on the steering wheel and one hand in my coat pocket, holding the bird. I want to tell you what happened after. Holden lived for another 11 weeks. I went back twice. Both times I sat in the hard chair. Both times we talked. The conversations were small. He told me a story about Eva that I had never heard. I told him about Priya. He laughed once, a small, real laugh. The first one I had heard from him in years. We did not talk about the money again. I did not stay at the house. I stayed at the same hotel. I never went back to the family kitchen. When he died, my mother called me. I picked up. I told her I was sorry. I meant it. I told her I would not be coming to the funeral. I had decided this in advance, not as a punishment, as a boundary. I had not, in the 11 weeks I had been visiting Holden, agreed to be the prodigal daughter, and I was not going to be cast in that role at his funeral. I told her I would mourn him in my own way. I told her I loved her. I told her, and I think this might have been the hardest sentence of my entire life. I told her, I am not going to pretend, Mom, not even for him. She did not understand. She was angry. She has been angry since. We do not speak. My father came to see me once, a few months after the funeral. He showed up at the library on a Tuesday afternoon. He didn't say much. He stood in the religious history section, which was empty, and he said, I wanted to see where you work. And I showed him. And we stood there for maybe an hour, looking at books, and at the end he said, your grandmother would be proud of you, Maren. And he left. I haven't seen him since, but he calls. Sometimes. I always pick up. Priya threw me a birthday party 4 months ago. 31, small, 6 people. There was a cake she had made herself. There was a moment, halfway through the evening, when she looked at me across the room, and her eyes filled up, and she didn't say anything, but I knew what she was thinking. She was thinking, you got out, and you stayed out, and you got to keep yourself. That's what I want to tell you about, if I'm honest. Not the dramatic part, not the hospital, not the corridor with my mother, the party, the cake, the friends, the ordinary Tuesday, the quiet apartment, the library on Saturday mornings. Because here is the thing nobody tells you about what comes after a hard decision. The reward is not a dramatic feeling. The reward is the ordinary. The reward is being able to sit on your green couch on a Sunday evening and not flinch at the sound of your own phone. The wooden bird is on my kitchen table. Right now, while I'm telling you this, I never put it back on a windowsill. I don't know why. It feels right where it is. Close to me, where I can see it. It does not mean I have forgiven him. I want you to know that. I have not. I'm not sure I ever will. Forgiveness, for me, was never the right question. I learned that eventually. The right question was, what do I want my life to be shaped by? I did not want my life to be shaped by getting back at him. That was the choice I made when I refused to ask for the money. I did not want my life to be shaped by hating him. That was the choice I made when I let myself sit in the chair and listen and hear that one true sentence he managed to say before he died. I did not want my life to be shaped by performing forgiveness either. That was the choice I made when I did not say, I forgive you in the hospital room, even though it was on the tip of my tongue. Even though it would have made the moment easier, even though it would have made everyone, including me, for a few minutes, feel better. What I wanted my life to be shaped by was the truth, the actual truth, which is my brother hurt me badly. My brother was also, in the end, a person who was capable of telling me one real sentence on his way out of the world. Both of those things are true. They do not cancel each other out. They sit next to each other, and they always will. And what I did in the end was neither forgive him nor avenge myself. What I did was decide every day for the rest of my life what kind of person I want to be in the wake of what happened. That is the only revenge I will ever take. And it is not really revenge at all. It is a life. If you are listening and someone who hurt you has become vulnerable, or one day will, I want you to know one thing. The world is going to tell you what to feel. Your family is going to tell you what to do. The internet is going to tell you what the right answer is. There will be people in your life who think you should forgive, and people who think you should walk away, and people who think you should do something cinematic, and people who think you should do nothing at all. None of them are going to live with your decision. You are. So when you sit at your kitchen table, and you will, one day, even if it's not a brother, even if it's not an illness, even if it's some other call from some other person who used to mean something, when you sit there and you hold your phone in your hands and you feel the floor of your life become liquid, I want you to ask only one question. Whose voice is speaking when I imagine what to do? Is it mine, or is it someone who has never had to live one day inside my body? And whatever you decide after that, go with it, even if it's messy, even if it doesn't look like the movie, even if no one understands. Because here's what I have learned after all of this. Forgiveness isn't something you owe. Revenge isn't something you have to take. And love, real love, is not a performance you stage for an audience of relatives in a hospital corridor. Love is the small, slow daily work of telling yourself the truth and refusing to make a scene about it. And refusing to be silent about it. And finding somewhere in between a life you can actually live. It is 7:14 on a Thursday evening, and I am sitting at my kitchen table. The phone is face down. The microwave clock is the same one. The pasta water is on the stove. The small wooden bird is in front of me, on the table where I can see it. I am not the woman I was 2 years ago. I am not the woman I was 11 weeks ago. I am not the woman I will be tomorrow. I am just here. And that, it turns out, is enough. That was always going to be enough. I just had to be the one who decided it was.